Last but not least, certainly, is the presentation by Ian Loomer, who is the Vice President of the Dallas headquarters of AMP Creative. Ian, you've implemented some data privacy features in your product and your company. What's that like?
Say that again?
So I'm saying that you've told me that you have been protecting client data in your company,
Yes.
while remaining, true to your
True to our
primary
creative
mission.
roots, absolutely.
Yes.
And that's why we're here today. We're here to talk about creative operations versus cybersecurity. And it seems, what is this epic battle? It's Rocky Balboa versus Apollo Creed. It's Bugs Bunny versus Elmer Fudd. It's black and blue dress versus white and gold. So we're going to talk about how protecting client data doesn't have to kill innovation. So quickly, I am Ian Loomer, Vice President of AMP. Thanks for that great introduction. AMP Creative is, at its core, a creative agency, if you couldn't get that from our name. We do innovative learning strategy. We're AR, VR, and XR development, mostly in soft skills, bias training, and all of that comes from a root of video production and some marketing background. So we came up as a video production company into the L&D space and kind of fell into AR, VR, XR, soft skills training. And that was a fantastic path for us, but we backed into a lot of the security from a different perspective because we weren't built up as a dev-first kind of company. We came in from this soft skills training route. But today, we are ISO 27001 certified, we are PCI compliant, and we are GDPR, LGPD, and CCPA self-attested. And if you don't know what any of that means, you're in the right room. That's what we're going to talk about today. Some of these certifications, why we're here. Talk about the high-level view of some of these various security frameworks. We're going to understand how some of these frameworks apply to you. And we're going to give some tips on kind of kicking off that security journey. All of this while keeping creativity and innovation at the forefront of everything that we're doing. And the real reason we're here is because this is the presentation that I wanted a few years ago. 3 years ago, a client came to us, one of our bigger clients, and said, you need to be ISO 27001 certified. It's a massive cybersecurity certification. I had no clue what I was going to do with it, how I was going to achieve it. It's a massive event. And over several years, I found out that it doesn't combat what we do. I thought we were going to be squashed by under all these policies and all these processes, and we don't deal with that level of data, and nobody's going to care. But it matters, and it's important. And so this topic, this discussion, is what I wished I had 3 years ago when I had so many questions and I was swamped with what is the next step that we can take as we start this journey. So there's a quote I love from Dan Farmer, who is a software engineer, big-time security expert, focused a lot on Linux in the early days, who said, if security were all that mattered, computers would never be turned on, let alone hooked into a network with literally millions of potential intruders. And I think a lot of people, especially in the creative operations world, think that's the way it is, that if we let in IT, if we let in our cybersecurity teams, that we're just going to be squashed. And the reality is that's not the case. That never was the case. And this conference itself proves that creativity and innovation is always at the forefront. And I think every event, every presentation I've been in today has talked about not only do we need to create and do we need to innovate, but we need to do it with an ethical understanding of security and privacy and building a safe metaverse for the next generation. So let's talk a little bit about some of the security frameworks. And we're going to go through these quickly because it's not super exciting. It's a lot of bullet points up there. Government required. This is the California Consumer Protection Act, GDPR for over in Europe. They're required by law. They're often self-attested. There's no upfront fees. They have limited changes. These are the big overarching security frameworks that companies have to follow if they want to operate in that country or that state. There's the contractually required or recommended. These are ones like ISO that was required by a client. If we want to work for them and we have access to their data or their consumer data, we have to follow this. They usually require a third-party auditor or some kind of validation. They have costs for certification, and there's regular updates to the frameworks, to the controls, because it's a third-party entity. PCI compliant. If you want to run credit cards, you need to be PCI compliant, and you're going to pay to have someone come in and try to break into your system to figure out, can we hack it? Are credit cards safe while you're working with them? And then the industry and society supported. These are supported by growing groups in a society or a specific industry. There's no auditing process. They're often self-attested. There's limited or no upfront fees. Some examples of this are XRSI, that we're here right now, the XR Safety Initiative. I also put up Certified B Corp, which is a fantastic certification that you can get, that while it doesn't focus on data privacy, it does focus on building an ethical company, which is something that both XRSI and Certified B do. So really, why does this all matter? We just walked through all of these certifications. What's the point? Why are we here? The reality is users want it to matter. Every user you're going to talk to wants their data protected, wants it kept private, doesn't want it shared or sold off to any other company. Clients and governments are requiring it. More and more, every contract I sign has very specific rules about how am I protecting their data? How is my company protecting what they're providing? A data breach equals bad PR. I don't think anyone thinks different than that. I see my marketing director over there nodding emphatically that yes, data breach is bad PR. Let's not do that. And then there is an ethical responsibility. XR has access to this deeply held, unconscious, confidential data. We do unconscious bias training. We do it in soft skills. Now imagine if someone takes this training, puts on the new HP Reverb Omnicep G2 5000, 8 million, whatever headset, and it's tracking your eyes, it's tracking your pupil dilation, it's watching your pulse, it's watching your mouth and the micro moves it's making. All that data gets computated and tabulated and read and put into a system, and it can be some incredibly intrinsic information that the user might not even understand or know about themselves. Because often in these scenarios, we are teaching them about something that they don't know. And that's the whole point of that. And I would argue that a lot of that unconscious, deeply held confidential data is just as important as someone's social security number. If that gets leaked out onto the internet and that gets put out to groups, any number of things can happen with that. So that's why it matters. These are some of those reasons. So now we're going to dive into some of these tips. Because as a creative operations professional, I am nothing if not, pragmatic. So these are things that I wanted to know, that I discovered along the journey, that I think are incredibly important, that need to get out there. So tip 1, decide what certifications are appropriate. This seems pretty straightforward. You have a client who's requiring a certification, that's what you should do. But you'll notice with this really terrible Venn diagram I've created that a lot of them are all tied in together. A lot of them have the same kind of controls. ISO 27001 has some like 70% of the similar controls of SOC 2. The NIST framework covers it all, and if your company is working with any kind of government entity, you'll likely have that. So if now you want to go and work with Marvel and you need the MPA trusted partners or the trusted partner network, you're going to need to do that certification, but you're pretty much basically there because it all fits inside the one larger framework. So if you're a smaller agency or an independent company looking to try and decide where do I need to go, take a look holistically at the whole platform of all the frameworks and see where can I target and start from the top down. Get outside help with our lovely, creepy consultants here. One of the hardest decisions we made was to spend $30,000 or $40,000 on outside consultants for our security framework. You see, I went to film school. I'm not a security professional. I'm not equipped to necessarily understand all 10 annexes of ISO, to understand all 114 controls and how they're listed out. It just was too much for me, in addition to all the other creative ops work that I was doing at the time. So with my one IT manager, we enlisted the help of an outside consultant to come in, and it was brilliant. They come in with forms and documents and pre-made templates for policies to help you get that leg up on how you're going to write all this out. Because the reality is, a lot of these processes and a lot of these controls can be solved by a lot of the companies in the same way. The footwork has already been done out there. No one has to reinvent the wheel. But as much as you need to get outside help, tip 3, don't trust the outside help. And if you can't tell, I'm not the graphic designer on the team. Don't trust the outside help. They are fantastic, wonderful professionals who know a whole lot. These might be outside consultants. These might be the security team at your company. If you're at a larger agency who has its own embedded, their goal is to get you across the line of the security framework that you're trying to achieve. They're not there to make the process necessarily the easiest for you. Now, that might align at some phrase, and it's not saying they're actively against you, but you are two competing entities at the same time. So while you need to get outside help, and you absolutely should look at doing that, understand that along the way, you have some agency in how all of this is done. Which brings us to tip 4, security doesn't trump creativity. And I know there's security people out here who are like, oh, it's for shame. Hold on with me here, because the next one is creativity doesn't dictate security. You have to work together. It is a 50-50 matching of all of these skills and all of these processes. An example of this is data at rest. All of these controls have very specific rules about data at rest. When data is on a hard drive, it needs to be encrypted, it needs to be protected. And doing that is fine, but what we noticed is in the process, when you're in the field, it slows down transfer rates by 30–40%. This data just drags on these external hard drives. Or when you're trying to read from an external hard drive that's encrypted, it slows down the reading process. And when you have a 360 camera with 26 cameras in it that you're trying to offload all of that footage, it can really slow down the process. So the creative fix for this, to notice that security doesn't trump creativity and creativity doesn't dictate security, is we just decided to get more transfer stations. With more transfer stations, it wasn't as big of an issue if we had to slow down 1 or 2 hard drives. It was a creative way around that problem that let our team just kind of keep working. Set your own timeline. We as creatives we live and die by timelines. We fully understand what it takes to create a project, how to work backwards from a date. And a lot of these clients, a lot of these consultants will come in and they'll say, we need you to do this in 6 months. We need you to do this in a year. And that can feel like a lot of pressure to get all of these controls under, because it'll feel like a massive monumental undertaking. And the reality is you don't have to have necessarily everything solved right at the beginning, because you're never going to get everything done in 6 months in a time frame. And a lot of these frameworks, what they have built in is pathways of understanding to allow you to extend things beyond an audit. As long as you acknowledge something to say, we know that that could be potentially a problem and we understand that risk, then they go, okay, at least you've acknowledged it, and next time we come around, we're going to see if you fix it. Because none of these security frameworks are about, black and white, you have to have everything done by this date. They're a framework of growth. And that's the whole point of security, and that's really the whole point of creativity. It's about understanding where you are in the world, in that universe, and growing from there. So constantly acknowledging what areas you need to fix and how you need to grow that security framework forward. Tip 6, get leadership engaged. This is simple, right? Get leader. Every leader loves to know about cybersecurity and wants to be involved in that 100% of the time, right? If your leadership isn't engaged in your cybersecurity policy, no one else on the team is going to be. So at our company, in the annual cybersecurity all hands on deck training, our owner is there. Our president is there right along with everyone getting the same training. From the top down, we engage them in monthly meetings and quarterly meetings where we discuss all of the cybersecurity concerns, all of the future growth. We have these quarterly leadership team engagement with the IT team. and we instill in them this need for risk-based thinking, and which is really what all of these security frameworks want you to do, is engage in risk-based thinking. If it starts at your leadership, it's going to transfer all the way down. If they're thinking about, okay, this new product we're developing, and we focus on also making sure that the data that we're collecting along the way is secure, and they put that on the team to make sure that they're also protecting that data, you best believe they're going to follow it because the top dog wants them to make sure that it's protected. And then the final one, tip 7, get your team involved. This seems straightforward. They're going to be involved in security trainings. They're going to be involved in making sure the processes are followed, but you should also involve them in creating those processes. I think a lot of people who starting these frameworks and start getting security involved, or this initiative is given to them, that they feel kind of alone and on an island. Like, I have to come up with all of this content, and then I have to push it out on the team, and they're just going to have to accept it. But that's not the case. You should get your team involved in creating the processes, because they're the ones who are going to have to follow them. And if they have a hand in it, if they have a stake in creating those policies, then they're going to be able to say, yes, we can follow those because I did it. Up there is our director of production, who helped us create, I guess, fix one of the controls that was all about project management. So one of the controls in ISO is all about making sure that you have security at mind in every step of project management. And I wasn't aware of how to show that. I wrote up a document that just says, we'll do it, I promise. That's not exactly the best way to go about that. So in working with our director of production, she was working on a team charter, and every project was going to have who was involved in the project, what their role was, what the creative brief was, how they know the project has succeeded, what are the values of the team. It was a great charter that every project would have, and in that we decided we could add a few extra little questions. What data is being handled? How will we protect that data? What level of confidentiality is it? A few simple questions that every project now makes sure that security is right up there with creativity. And so at every project, at the beginning, they're always thinking about security next to creative operation. So that's it. 7 tips, things I wish I'd known. And yeah, I think we got like 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Any questions? Cool. That works for me. Yes?
Since you presented NIST as one of the more comprehensive frameworks that you can be compliant with, what lessons can we get from the NIST framework that we could port, for instance, into creating new XR standards and frameworks?
I couldn't tell you because I don't actually know NIST. We are not NIST compliant. I know there's 3 levels of NIST. There's a low end, a medium, and a high end NIST framework. And it largely works for government entities, people who are working with federal companies. And the big thing I can take from that, the NIST framework, and just my research of it and study, is that it's all about locking down data at every step of the way. Other controls, SOC, ISO, MPAA, there's a lot more leeway in working with that data and how it gets transferred and how it gets passed along. And NIST is a lot more exacting about those controls. And so I think in the XR world, especially with data, it would really be about implementing those controls on the server side so that data has more stopgaps before it can potentially get released.
Are there any other lessons from any of the other frameworks that you do know better that you might want to sort of extrapolate? In the same way that we think about using ethical AI frameworks to creating ethical XR frameworks, what about data and standards and other disciplines that we can bring those lessons in?
I mean, I think when you're following ISO or XRSI, which is a beautiful framework, which is the one I would highly suggest everyone look at for security when it comes to XR, you know, a lot of it tracks the same of like CCPA or GDPR and how you're doing that. What XR we need to think about, which XRSI talks a lot about, and I mentioned the What Is Matters, is the ethical framework, which I don't think is really discussed a whole lot, and what I would almost suggest ISO starts bringing into the equation. Because what I've gleaned from ISO and SOC and even MPA is that they don't necessarily care about the implication of where the data is stored or how it's transferred. They just want to know it's protected. And there's not a whole lot of ethical consideration about what you're doing with that data or where it goes after that. And I think that's what needs to happen in all of these. So I don't have a lot to say about like what ISO is missing or what I could take from ISO that transfers to XR. If you're following good cybersecurity practices and you're involved in these frameworks, it automatically applies to XR. What we need to do now is think about how we're treating that data. And I think a lot of those concerns need to get pushed to those frameworks. Cool. I know this was during the happy hour, and so Jay brought beer, if anyone needs that. We got some of that up here. I don't know if there's loud. The tech guys in the back there are like, yeah, what's up? How you doing? Got you. Cool.
Thank you, Ian. A round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this concludes our cybersecurity and safety track. So time to say thank you. Time to say thank you to all the attendants.
And I just want to thank Rachel Michelson. I want to thank you. Please, round of applause for this woman. And you can hate me for it, Rachel, but she is the lead of Medical XR Council. And at the beginning, Rachel might have mentioned she has multiple sclerosis. This woman does everything with half her body for what we cannot even do with full body. So, I mean, I am just so honored to work with you, Rachel, and to build all this framework and safety. Thank you so bloody much.